Hello student, today we are going to discuss about paper first, that is GG 301, Environmental Geography. In this unit number 3, we have to study biodiversity. Biodiversity refers to the variety and variability among all groups of living organisms and the ecosystem complexes in which they occur. Biodiversity is the total variety of life on the earth. It includes all genes, species, and ecosystems, and the ecological processes of which that are part. Biodiversity simply means variety of living species of organisms of both plant and animal communities in an ecosystem. The term biodiversity was first coined and used by Walter G. Rosen in the year 1986. Biodiversity is the totality of genes, species, and ecosystem in a region. Biodiversity involves different species of plants and animals. The richness and poorness of biodiversity of a region depends on the number of species. That is, the largest number, the richest the biodiversity, and minimum the number, poorest the biodiversity. The ecological balance of the region is directly related to biodiversity. The region having a rich biodiversity has ecological balance, while the region having poor biodiversity has ecological imbalance and indicates environmental degradation. Now, the types of biodiversity. On the basis of elements of biodiversity, these elements are genetic variations, species variation, ecosystem variation, temporal variation. It is basically divided into the three types. These types are genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. Now, the genetic diversity. It is the basic source of biodiversity. Genetic diversity is considered as variations and differences at the level of genes in the species of plants and animals. Genes are the basic units of hereditary information transmitted from one generation to another. When the genes within the same species show different versions due to new combinations, it is called genetic variability. For the example, all rice variety belong to the species Oryza sativa, but there are thousands of wild and cultivated variety of richness which show variations at the genetic level and differ in their color, size, shape, nutrient, etc. content of the grain. This is the genetic diversity of rice. Then species diversity. Species diversity simply means variety and variability of a species of biological communities of a given ecosystem. It represents broadly the species richness and their abundance in a community. Species diversity refers to the variety and number of different types of individual populations of living organisms in an ecosystem. For the example, number of species of plants and animals include microorganisms. Variety and number of individual populations of organisms of each species in equatorial rainforest ecosystem, etc. It may be mentioned that it is the size of species diversity that makes the food chains longer or shorter, which in turn determine the degree of biodiversity. The greater species diversity makes longer food chains, which in turn make rich biodiversity, as is the case of the equatorial rainforest, which has become biodiversity hotspot, means richest biodiversity. Then ecosystem diversity. It is the diversity of a ecological complexity showing variation in a trophic structure, food webs, nutrient cycling, etc. The ecosystems also show variations with respect to physical parameters like moisture, temperature, altitude, precipitation, etc. Here, the statement is like the ecosystem also shows variations with respect to physical parameters like moisture, temperature, altitude means elevation, precipitation. Means the physical parameters are not even everywhere. These are accordingly. Thus, there occurs tremendous diversity within the ecosystem. We may consider the diversity in a forest ecosystem, which is supposed to have mainly a dominance of trees. But while considering a tropical rainforest, a tropical deciduous forest, a temperate deciduous forest, etc., the variations observed are just too many, and they are mainly due to variations in the above mentioned physical factors. जे प्राकृतिक घटक जे आहेत हे वेगवेगळ्या ठिकाणी वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारे अवेलेबल असतात आणि त्यानुसार इकोसिस्टम डायव्हर्सिटी त्या ठिकाणी असते. The ecosystem diversity is of great value that must be kept intact. If we destroy this diversity, it would disrupt the ecological balance. We cannot even replace the diversity of one ecosystem by that of another, because ecosystem diversity has evolved with respect to the prevailing environmental conditions with well regulated ecological balance. Now, threats to biodiversity. Extinction or elimination of a species is a natural process of evolution. The process of extinction has become fast in the recent years of human civilization. Due to the human impact, thousands, thousands of species and varieties becoming extinct annually. It is estimated by ecologists that there is an extinction of about 10,000 species per year, or about 27 species per day. The figure indicates the serious threat to biodiversity. If the present trend continues about the extinction of species, we would lose one third to two-thirds of our current biodiversity by the middle of 21st century. Loss of habitat, poaching of wildlife, man-wildlife conflicts, etc. are the causes of threats to biodiversity. Now, the poaching of wildlife. Poaching is the illegal taking of wildlife in violation of local, state, federal, or international law. Activities that are considered poaching include killing an animal out of season without a license, with a prohibited weapon, or in a prohibited manner is poaching. Poaching is a threat to wildlife despite ban on a trade in products from endangered species. Smuggling of wildlife items continues. The trading of wildlife products is highly profitable for the poachers. They hunt this prohibited wildlife and smuggle it to another countries. Smuggling of wildlife items includes furs, hides, means skin of an animal, horns, tusks, live specimens, and herbal products, and so on. The poaching is illegal taking of wildlife. Then the effect of poaching: a reduction in predators may cause prey population to grow out of hand, while a reduction in fruit-eating mammals may affect seed dispersal. alternating the fauna of an ecosystem. Decrease in wildlife population due to poaching of wildlife for commercial hunting. Next point is man-wildlife conflict. Sometimes there is a conflicting situation when wildlife starts causing damage and danger to man. And under such conditions, it becomes difficult to pacify the affected villagers and gain local support for wildlife conservation. There are some examples regarding the man wildlife conflict. Man wildlife conflict defined by Worldwide Fund for Nature as any interaction between man and wildlife that results in native impact on human, social, economic, or cultural life, on the conservation of wildlife population, or on the environment. Human wildlife conflict occurs when the needs and behavior of wildlife impact negatively on the goals of humans, or when the goals of humans negatively impact the needs of wildlife. Man wildlife conflict refers to the interaction between wild animals and people and the resultant negative impact on people or their resources or wild animals or their habitat. It occurs when growing human population overlap with established wildlife territory, creating a reduction of resources or life to some people or wild animals. The root causes of man wildlife conflicts are uh, like due to the sinking forest cover, the habitat of wildlife diminishes, which compels the wildlife to move outside the forest and attack the field or sometimes even humans. Usually, the ill and injured animals have a tendency to attack man. The animals move out of the forest in search of food. It may be noticed that one adult elephant needs 2 quintals of green fodder and 150 kilograms of clean water daily. And if it is not available, the animals trace out due to the development of human settlements in the path of wildlife animals. The path of wild animals has been disrupted and animals attack the settlements. In this way, there is a conflict between man and wildlife. The next part will be continued during the next lecture. Thank you.